Truth is, some of the most disturbing experiences happen somewhere far more ordinary, somewhere that should feel completely safe, like your own backyard. Tonight I'm going to share 3 true scary stories where someone realized they were not alone outside their house, and the last one still hasn't been fully explained. Because sometimes the thing watching you outside might already know who you are. The first story happened to someone who grew up as the middle child between 2 brothers. Both of his brothers were involved in scouting when they were younger. His older brother eventually made it all the way to Eagle Scout, while the younger one joined later but didn't stay long. For some reason though, their parents never pushed him to become a scout, and as a kid that always made him feel like he was missing out on something exciting. Whenever his older brother prepared for a camping trip with the troop, he watched with a mixture of curiosity and jealousy. His brother would practice setting up a tent in the backyard, organize his gear, and talk about the places they were going to camp. Sometimes their parents would take him along for the drive when they dropped his brother off with the troop, and he'd watch all the other scouts getting ready for the weekend, building campfires and setting up tents, but then he would have to go back home while everyone else stayed. That feeling of being left out stuck with him, so one night he came up with an idea that seemed perfect for a kid his age. If he couldn't go on a real camping trip, why not camp in the backyard? To him that felt like the next best thing. His parents thought the idea was harmless enough and agreed to let him and his older brother set up the tent outside for the night. Their backyard already had a bit of a wilderness feel to it. The neighborhood had large open properties and very few fences, with thick patches of trees separating different yards, which made the whole area feel bigger and darker once the sun went down. That evening they set up the tent near the fire pit and roasted marshmallows together while the sky slowly turned dark. Their younger brother joined them for the campfire, but he was only 4 years old, so their parents eventually brought him back inside when it got late. After a while their parents told them it was time to get ready for bed. They climbed into the tent with their sleeping bags and handheld consoles, the small screens lighting up the inside of the tent while they played quietly for a while. Eventually his older brother put the console down and quickly fell asleep, but he couldn't do the same. The sleeping bag felt strange and uncomfortable, and the ground beneath the tent felt uneven. Every sound from outside seemed louder than it should have been. The wind moving through the trees, the distant noise of insects, even the faint crackle of the dying fire all kept him awake longer than he expected. Eventually though he drifted off. When he woke up again sometime later in the night, it took a moment for him to remember where he was. The inside of the tent was dark with only faint gray moonlight coming through the fabric. For a few seconds he just looked around trying to orient himself, and that's when he noticed something strange. The sleeping bag next to him was empty. His older brother was gone. At first he assumed his brother must have gone back inside the house because he couldn't sleep, but then he realized something that immediately made him uneasy. The tent zipper was still closed. Suddenly the idea of being alone in the tent didn't feel exciting anymore. It felt terrifying. He slowly moved toward the entrance and began unzipping the tent, but before stepping out he paused and decided to peek outside first. As a kid he still had that small fear of running into the dark yard without checking what was out there. So he carefully looked through the opening. That's when he saw someone sitting by the fire pit. For a brief moment he thought it must be his brother, but the figure was much larger than it should have been. Then he realized the truth. It was a grown man sitting in the chair, facing directly toward the tent. For a split second their eyes seemed to meet. He gasped and immediately zipped the tent shut again before scrambling back into his sleeping bag as if the thin fabric around him could somehow protect him. His heart was pounding so loudly he thought the man outside might hear it. He stayed completely still, hoping the man might think the tent was empty. For a few seconds there was silence. Then he heard the chair near the fire pit shift slightly against the ground. A moment later came the sound of footsteps moving slowly through the grass. Each step seemed closer than the last. Suddenly the moonlight shining through one side of the tent disappeared as a shadow blocked it. Someone was standing right outside. He held his breath, terrified to make even the smallest movement. Then he heard the zipper begin to move. Very slowly it started sliding downward. It only moved a few inches, but the sound felt deafening in the quiet night. Near the bottom of the tent there was a tiny gap where the zipper didn't fully seal. He had never noticed it before that night. Through that small opening he suddenly saw something that froze him in place. An eye. Just one eye staring directly at him. For several seconds he couldn't scream or move. His body felt completely paralyzed with fear. The eye squinted slightly as if the person outside was smiling. Then the zipper moved again. That was the moment he finally screamed. He kicked out of the sleeping bag and knocked into the tent poles, causing the entire tent to shake and partially collapse. The instant he made noise he heard the person outside run across the yard. Seconds later the back porch light turned on and his father burst through the door shouting and running toward the tent. By the time his father reached the fire pit area the man was already gone. The police were called that night and officers searched the neighborhood, but they never found anyone. For weeks afterward he slept in his parents' room because the idea of being alone at night terrified him. Eventually life returned to normal, or at least it seemed that way. About a month later during recess at school he was playing near the fence at the edge of the schoolyard when a man on the other side called out for directions. The request seemed harmless at first, but then the man said something that made his stomach drop. He asked if his name was Chris. He had never told the man his name. When he looked closer at the man's face he felt a wave of fear rush through him because he recognized the voice and the expression. It was the same man who had been outside the tent that night. He quickly told the man his name wasn't Chris and ran toward one of the teachers supervising recess. By the time the adults looked toward the fence the man had already disappeared. The school called his parents immediately and he was taken home early that day. To this day he still wonders how that man knew who he was and what might have happened if he hadn't screamed that night. But sometimes the person watching you isn't a stranger wandering through your yard. Sometimes they're the one inviting you there. The second story happened to someone who had recently bought his first house and was searching online for furniture to fill it. One afternoon he came across a listing that immediately caught his attention. The photos showed several items for sale but two stood out the most, a cream-colored sectional couch that looked almost brand new and a high-quality mountain bike. The price for everything seemed suspiciously cheap. After a short conversation with the seller they agreed on a slightly lower price and arranged for him to pick up the items later that evening. When he looked up the address beforehand he noticed something interesting. The house was located near the coast and the satellite view showed a large property overlooking the ocean. The place looked far more expensive than someone selling furniture that cheaply. Still curiosity got the better of him. When he arrived the driveway stretched through a wooded area before opening into a huge clearing. At the top of the hill sat a massive house with a clear view of the ocean cliffs behind it. But one detail felt strange. An old worn-out sedan was parked near the driveway and it didn't match the expensive property at all. He walked up to the front door where he found a note that read doorbell broken, please use back door. So he walked around the house toward the back deck. All the blinds covering the windows were closed. He knocked on the sliding glass door and waited but there was no answer. After a while he sat on one of the chairs on the deck while sending another message to the seller asking if he was home. Still nothing. Eventually he walked down toward the edge of the property to take a photo of the sunset over the ocean. But when he turned back toward the house something had changed. Every blind in the house was now open. And standing in each window was a person. They weren't moving at all. They stood perfectly still like statues staring directly at him. At first he wondered if they might be mannequins placed there as some kind of joke. Then he noticed something that made his chest tighten with fear. Every single one of them was smiling. That was enough for him. He immediately headed back toward his truck without looking at the windows again. As he reversed down the driveway he glanced once more at the house and saw the front door standing open with a man on the porch watching him leave. Later he spoke with a neighbor who called the real homeowner. The homeowner said he wasn't even in town and had never posted any listing online. The fake profile that arranged the meeting disappeared shortly afterward. To this day he still wonders why those people wanted him there and what would have happened if he had gone inside the house. The final story happened during a late-night pool party at a quiet house surrounded by woods. After everyone left and the house finally became silent, he went upstairs to get ready for bed. Around 2 in the morning he suddenly heard a loud splash coming from the backyard pool. At first he assumed someone from the party might have stayed behind and decided to jump in as a joke. But when he looked out the window he saw someone swimming alone in the pool even though every guest had already gone home hours earlier. The swimmer moved slowly through the water before suddenly stopping in the middle of the pool. Then the person turned their head and looked directly up at the window where he was standing. Even from that distance he could see the expression clearly. The swimmer was smiling at him. The next morning police searched the woods behind the house after finding footprints near the pool, but the tracks eventually stopped in the middle of the forest as if the person had simply disappeared. Which of these 3 stories disturbed you the most? The stranger outside the tent, the people standing in the mansion windows, or the swimmer in the pool at 2 in the morning? Let me know in the comments, and if you enjoy real horror stories like these, consider subscribing because the next one might be even more unsettling.